I don't want to run too far into lunch, so we might get started on the next session and then people can filter in as they finish up in their other sessions. So for this next session, we're going back to banking and we'll be looking at what happens when traditional banks and fintechs work together. And I know this has been a topic that's been quite talked about at Intersect already, but the future of fintech really doesn't have to be a them versus us context, but it can be a mutually beneficial relationship between established banks and up-and-coming startups. In this session, we hear from Justin Brown from ANZ, Emily Nicholas from NAB, and David Washbrook from Look Who's Charging about the benefits of collaboration and how it can help solving real problems. This session is moderated by Jennifer Harrison from Reputation Edge. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much. A major theme of this year's Intersect is fintech bank collaboration, and we have one of the industry's big success stories here on stage at the moment. So on stage with me are David Washbrook, co-founder of Look Who's Charging. Hello, David.
Hi, Jennifer.
And also Emily Nicholas, who is Head of Digital Engagement at NAB.
Hello.
Hello. And Justin Brown, who is Product Owner Digital Innovation at ANZ.
Hello.
Hello. Wonderful. David, let's start with you. Can you tell us, please, for people who don't know Look Who's Charging, give us the elevator pitch.
Yeah, so Look Who's Charging is all about providing deep enrichment of bank statement data. We can provide up to 80 different data points on the merchant behind a transaction. We deliver this data via APIs primarily to financial institutions. So anyone who banks with NAB, with ANZ, with Westpac, with about 20 other banks in the Australian market, if you look at your app and you see some nice pretty logos and names and map icons, that's Look Who's Charging providing that data.
Wonderful. Let's understand a little bit more about the problem you solve for and how you're using technology to do it.
Yeah, so I think the problem is pretty easy to understand. Everyone's experienced the issue of looking at your bank statement and half the time it may as well be written in a language you don't understand. You might look at it, you see RM Williams Pty Limited, you think you've been out buying new boots, you don't remember doing that. So you might turn to Google, it'll tell you it's a boot company. You turn to the bank, they can't often help you, and it's a new KFC restaurant that's opened on Collins Street in Melbourne. So an incredibly sort of frustrating issue, both for consumers and banks alike. Results in a lot of sort of inadvertent friendly fraud, cards getting cancelled. A big, expensive problem for the banks, and it sucks up a lot of resources. So Look Who's Charging was really born to solve that specific problem. We've since moved on to numerous other use cases of the data set. That's where the company was born. And around technology, it's an entirely cloud-based business. I think it was built using a handful of JB Hi-Fi laptops to build a business, which is probably testament to what you can do in this day and age. A decade ago, you probably wouldn't be able to do that, but to build a business that's now processing 3 billion transactions a month with bank-level enterprise-grade security on $7,000-8,000 of hardware, pretty incredible thing.
It is incredible. Now, if you could go back, please, to 2017. Look Who's Charging, very first client was one of Australia's biggest banks. It was NAB. David, how did that happen?
Yeah, well, we sort of first started off enriching a few thousand transactions a month via our website to the public. We were initially thinking about dealing with accounting companies or even direct to consumers. There's probably a bit of a chance meeting at a Visa pitch event where we got to meet a couple of people from NAB, and sort of one thing led to another, and neither myself or Stuart or our other co-founder have any experience in enterprise sales or dealing with banks. And from that first meet to go live took about 7 months, and at the time we were thinking, geez, how can it take so long? But 4.5 years into it with some other banks, we're now like, wow, I can't believe that was so quick. And then one thing sort of led to another, quickly started working with ANZ afterwards, and now it's got 40 projects across 25 different banks.
Amazing, well done. Emily, can you tell us from NAB's perspective, what is it about the Look Who's Charging solution that makes it interesting for you?
I think Dave touched on it before. It's like solving a clear customer pain point, and that's kind of the starting point for us. Our call centre deal with that transaction not recognised query, is one of the probably top reasons that our card customers call through to the bank. So that kind of starting with that customer problem and then looking at what the actual solution does is probably really understandable. So as we sort of take that and socialise that internally, it's quite an easy message to kind of sell through the NAB ecosystem and understand why we would partner with Look Who's Charging to solve that core problem.
Great, thank you. And Justin, from another big bank's perspective, can you tell us a little bit about the decision to buy a solution in rather than build it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we spent a fair bit of time on this internally, sort of working out whether we wanted to go down, I suppose, the fintech or the external path. There are a few sort of areas in the bank where we obviously had this data, and it was very accurate data, but as Dave has explained, accuracy doesn't always mean that it's valuable for customers. And I think once we sort of set about trying to solve the problem, we quickly realised that to have a very fresh, up-to-date, accurate and sort of real-time data set was important, and there wasn't really a part of the bank that had that. Certainly the customer experience that we wanted to do around having logos, having something that was very quickly and easily identifiable for customers. I suppose if you're thinking about looking at your mobile banking app, you're looking at transactions almost every time you go in there. And the data or the services that we had internally available to us just didn't quite meet the need in terms of the customer experience that we wanted. So we sort of did a bit of a bake-off and let sort of the data drive us, but in the end it was a pretty easy decision to go down the Look Who's Charging path.
Wonderful. And from where it started, David, now you're actually supplying a lot more, you're doing a lot more with NAB and ANZ. So from the one initial solution, now it has become a fuller partnership, and in fact you're driving some of their PFM and mobile banking apps. Can you talk us through, and also Emily and Justin, how did that relationship and collaboration just get bigger and stronger over time?
Yeah, thanks. For us, it was a strategy we had almost from the beginning was not to boil the ocean, as it were. It was, we'll do one thing, we'll do it very well, and then the business should take care of itself from there. So we were very much focused. There's lots of different use cases for our data. You mentioned PFM, but when you move through the lending space, even before open banking, the big banks are getting a big chunk of volume internally. So categorizing that data for, loan decisioning. All the data analytics the banks are running when you come to loyalty, being able to do, cashback, based on the transactional data. Huge number of use cases. But for us, it was really, finding that team, doing the one thing, doing it well, and sort of landing and expanding through the banks from there, which we've been very successful doing. I think with NAB and ANZ, it started off with one engagement, and a couple of years later, we've probably got, close to 15 plus engagements just with the two banks alone. So there's obviously a big barrier. The banks are large, complex organisations juggling numerous stakeholders. You're juggling regulators, government, shareholders, millions of customers. So there's a barrier to doing business with a bank, which is understandable. But that's also, I guess, can play in your favour, because once you've gone through that barrier and you're on board and you're working with the bank, I think we sort of never in doubt who our masters are, but it's very much felt like a partnership, both with NAB and ANZ. Sort of once we've gone in there, done that one thing, and you're onboarded, the information security, the procurement, the legal process, then there's really is a lot of opportunities.
Emily, I'm interested to hear a bit more from the bank's perspective about the procurement process and the risk socialisation, and I think you said, and the conversations internally. What does it take internally to achieve the partnership?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of legwork, right? You kind of need to navigate the complex ecosystem that is a big bank, and you've got lots of internal and external stakeholders that you need to manage, all of them with a different sort of view or lens on what impact you're going to surface into the area that they care about. So being able to have, like I said before, a really understandable solution and proposition actually makes that sort of internal sell job a lot easier. It takes a lot to kind of get anything through, and that's right. We manage a lot of money, we have a lot of customers, we've got a sort of big obligation, so all of those controls and measures are in place for good reason, but it is certainly pretty cumbersome to navigate, and would feel that way, I think, externally, trying to be a supplier or partner to a big bank. So I think, Dave touched on it before, having the kind of one thing that you do really well opens the door for the sort of next use cases, both from the supplier point of view, but also the service. You know, we trust their data, we trust the SLAs that we get. We've got, you know, direct access to Dave and Stu when something, you know, needs a query or a follow-up. So I think that is kind of giving you a ticket to the game, right, to exist in partnership with the big bank.
Thank you. And Justin, would it be similar from ANZ's perspective?
Yeah, completely similar. I sort of won't touch on the same things that you guys have talked about, but I think certainly from a tech perspective and being able to have something that was, you know, almost easier to integrate with than some of our internal systems, certainly made, you know, the seeds, I suppose, of the relationship and getting an experience out to market, you know, reasonably quickly from banks' perspective at least, was something that was really good. So yeah, certainly sort of echo the other sentiment, but yeah, from a tech perspective, being able to have something that was, you know, quite simple to integrate to, definitely sort of safe, secure, and not really sending around super sensitive, you know, customer identifiable information, which, you know, certainly makes it easier from a risk and compliance perspective, was something that was attractive for us.
Thank you. So David, where to now? What's the, you know, short, medium term future of Look Who's Charging now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we do have lofty ambitions of growing this business internationally. There's been a lot going in Australia, which has kept us busy, and the panel before, I think, touched on some of the, you know, the resource constraints in the Australian market. But yeah, we came together obviously with Experian Group last year, which are a large listed British company. So they've got, you know, armies of data scientists around the world and MSAs with pretty much every bank globally, every major bank globally. So it's really leveraging that, you know, that network to, yeah, take Look Who's Charging to other markets. Yeah.
Okay, and David, if you had to summarise, would you have 3 top tips for fintechs seeking to work with big banks?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, yeah, the one I touched on earlier about keeping it simple, it's really that elevator pitch. I think we obviously had some early success with NAB, but I remember at ANZ with one of the people who worked with Justin, and we were going through the sales process, and he literally was in the elevator with Shane Elliott, the CEO of the bank at the time, and he literally gave him the elevator pitch. And with our business,
in the elevator.
Wonderful. In the elevator, he gave. Well, there was a photograph, I think, as well of them by the elevator with Shane Elliott showing the prototype. But it's a, you know, very simple problem. You can explain this business to your gardener or someone you meet on the street or anyone within seconds, and they get it. And it's very visual within the app. So I think keeping things simple, being able to articulate it clearly and concisely, because senior executives are busy people, right? So they need to be able to get it. So yeah, that's probably the number one tip. You know, secondly, I think keep knocking on the door and it will eventually open. Banks, you know, there's 30, 40,000 people in the banks. A huge number of those people, you know, are dedicated to, you know, the bank not messing up. But there are, you know, lots of good people within those banks who do want to, you know, innovate and deliver, you know, solutions to solve customer problems. And we've had experiences with some other banks where, you know, we've actively been told no by senior stakeholders. Well, the worst thing is never getting told, right? I think, you know, the UK people, you used to be pretty good at saying no. I think when you come to Australia, you tend to just not get an answer, so you don't know. But, you know, we have got lots of no's. You know, with one bank, we went through 80 different stakeholders from the CEO pretty much down to the, you know, the teller on the tills in a branch. And over 3.5 years, we completely wrote them off and then had a chance meeting at a conference and, you know, quickly went live with them afterwards. And, you know, we've got similar stories with other banks. I think if you've got a proven business, you know, have the confidence, have the perseverance, keep knocking on the doors, and one will eventually open.
And Emily, from the bank perspective, any top tips for fintechs?
Yeah, I think, Dave, it's probably your tips is why we're in business together. Yeah, like I guess if you can kind of de-risk yourself, so going back to what I said about putting on those multiple hats, like we deal with a lot of risk partners, whether it's, you know, security advisors, fin crime, like thinking about your business continuity plans, all of those things. If you can sort of have a good answer to the risk that you might present as a potential partner to a bank, then you're on the front foot already as to solving some of the no's that you might get internally. I think perseverance is probably also a really really important one. There's lots of people in the bank and seats change a bit. So when you think you've kind of got the right contact, you may not. So you kind of have to keep navigating the landscape. That's definitely an important one. And I think probably last bit is, our core kind of role as a bank is to lend money, to take deposits and to move money, right? So if you're kind of adding a value add on top of that, I think that's where, we're not a data enrichment business, we're a sort of financial service. So I think having that kind of value add to our core proposition is where it made it really successful. Yep.
Thank you. And Justin, do you have some top tips as well for the fintechs?
I think you guys have covered a lot. Definitely what I said before around integration and making it as easy as possible for banks and the tech in banks to sort of pick up and use the service was certainly something that was important to us. I think as well, like just yes, keep it simple, but start small too. So I'm not sure if Look Who's Charging would have said 4 or 5 years ago that they would have had did everything that's sort of now on their plate. So starting small, with us or with NAB was definitely something that was useful and meant that we didn't sort of have to bite off, too much to start off with. Like a few years ago, sending data into the cloud and getting millisecond response times in your main digital channel was something that was pretty scary for banks. So starting sort of as small as we can, and then building out from there into sort of what we have today is definitely something that was beneficial for us and the relationship.
Thank you. We should say on the Look Who's Charging website, there are actually a couple of case studies that are available. There's one on the NAB relationship and one on the ANZ relationship. So they're just available on the website if anyone is interested to look. We do have time for some questions, but I know we're holding people up from lunch, but we're very happy to take some questions. And Emily does have to go back to the office, but both David and Justin will be staying for lunch if you wanted to come and approach them over lunch. We might see if there are any questions from the audience.
Hi guys, Duncan from Marketa. Firstly, congratulations, Dave. Whenever anyone kind of mentions collaboration with banks, I typically kind of point towards you. Kind of question is probably more centred around ANZ and kind of this the acceptance to use a partner that uses that one of your competitor uses, and the sorts of kind of conflict that you would have had internally, and potentially, David, what sort of exclusivity some of your bank partners wanted to try and enforce on you?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that a bit. I mean, I think initially when sort of Look Who's Charging started working with NAB, they sort of came to us as well, and we weren't really sort of quite ready, and I suppose then sort of 6 months later you sort of came back and we were probably a little bit more ready. But I think for us it was way more about, how are we, or what customer problem are we solving here, and is Look Who's Charging a good way of doing that? We'd had a bit of experience before with some other stuff that we did around, competitor offerings and even sort of, using logos and things like that, which was really important to us. So it was much more around, is Look Who's Charging the right way of solving, the customer problem and delivering on the customer experience that we wanted to do at the time, which it was. So we were pretty comfortable from that perspective. And then I think, again, like once we, spent a lot more time with sort of, Dave and Stu and the gang at Look Who's Charging, we were much more comfortable that they were, the right organisation to do what we wanted to do together.
It's an interesting point you raised, Duncan. I think the conversation's definitely moved on. When we were first starting out 4 years ago, I mean, I think Reinventure and NAB had the two venture arms at the time, but there were definitely some conversations with some banks, around, only work with you if we can sort of part own you, but if another bank parts own you, then this bank won't work with you. So it either felt like you need to almost take equity from everyone or from no one. So I think we went down the route of taking it from no one to keep the market open, and we were open from the start that this business, was about servicing, we're a data company. You guys do the innovation with the user interface, etc. We'll do the data. But I think the conversation's definitely moved on now with sort of ANZ have obviously got their venture arm and with the stuff CBA are doing. So I think everyone's much more receptive now to not necessarily it's kind of all or nothing from an equity perspective or working with perspective. So it's been great to see that evolve as well, and hopefully, good for the greater Australian fintech landscape, the banks, and ultimately the end consumer.
There's probably a selling point to it, right, Dave? Like, so now on the basis that multiple banks' customers are sending that transaction data to you guys, your database gets richer, and that's kind of part of your selling point now, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the scale of the business, I think everyone benefits, the network effect. So, your customers will give feedback, which will build into the engine, and Justin's customers will benefit from that, and vice versa as well for all of our customers.
Any more questions?
We do have about another 5 minutes. Lunch has been pushed back if you'd like to continue as well.
So Justin, I'm an ANZ customer. Is this active and live now? I don't see logos on my statements yet. I'm very jealous.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So yes, very much live, and has been live and performing very well for a long period of time, but only in the mobile app at the moment. So yes, we would love to bring it to internet banking and other channels, but at the moment it's mobile only. So check your ANZ app and it will be there in all its glory. Thank you. Another happy customer.
I just had a question for Dave, really. Post Lookers Charging's acquisition by Experian, has that changed how you now engage and work with the banks?
Look, I don't think so. We've kept the same team of people, our same infrastructure, and really got some synergies, if anything, especially around the procurement process and contracting with new banks. Say often the technical integration, we can get that done in a couple of sprint cycles with a bank. So 6 weeks you can get the tech integration done, but the quickest you can probably get through a procurement process with an MSA is probably 3 months. If you've got to do an MSA, a master service arrangement, you're probably looking at 6 to 9 month process potentially. So I think from that perspective, it's really, really driven some synergies. And I think to my earlier point, if we do want to go overseas, you'd have to, try and scale up an incredible amount of resources, not necessarily focusing on core product or technology, but just to navigate that process, which there should be a ready-made infrastructure for us to do that now.
Can I just maybe add something? Just coming back to your point before around sort of internet banking and mobile, maybe in the past we probably would have looked at that and said, well, it's going to be harder or more complex to bring it to both channels at once, and the approach there might have been to actually not do the work or wait until we'd solved all of that to bring it to market at both, whereas it was actually good this time around that we said, well, we know that we can get something into the mobile channel and it's going to be really valuable for the 3, 4, 5 million customers that we have there. Let's do that first and see where it leads, as opposed to waiting and trying to get sort of the nirvana across all of our digital channels. So whilst there's still, and we knew there would be a bit of customer pain on that one, it's still a better outcome than potentially waiting and not getting anything at all sort of over the line.
Keeping me busy.
I just have a question around, not specifically, but around commercials and how you structure that with a bank. How do you value what you're doing, and how does the bank value what you're bringing to them? But also around implementation charges, so the pre-live kind of costs, a 6-week integration process and all that sort of thing. Is that paid for on the bank side, or is that something that you shoulder, or is that now changing as you're getting more traction in the market so that the bank is more trusting of what you're going to provide to them, so you're now not covering that for future relationships? Is there a variable component to API calls, or is it a fixed, ongoing monthly type or annual subscription to your service? Just some general points around the commercial stuff, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one, look, I say, none of the founders of the business had any experience dealing with banks or enterprise sales, so we were kind of learning a bit on the go with that. The lesson we realised pretty quick is when you're dealing with banks, though, they need a defined number So you take the volume-based approach or anything that's variable when they're trying to get a purchase order raised, for the next 12 months. If it could be anything from here to here, it makes it much more complex with a bank. So it's picking a number, that's reasonable for both parties, and we had a cost out associated, calls out the cost center, etc. But I think if you're a fintech, though, your cost to serve are relatively low. Banks are used to working with big organizations, and the fees are, probably pretty large as a result of that. So, we got, what we thought was some very generous commercials agreed, and I think the banks probably thought they were getting, extremely sort of generous fees as well. But we took the approach of, it's a sort of fixed fee, so everyone has the certainty as to what it is. Our costs do have a bit of variability, but not a huge amount, so we were able to sort of take that approach. And COVID, et cetera, has really, increased the volumes that have come through those organizations. But we do, if we're working with a neobank or a startup bank, then we look to do something, that scales a bit more. But we kind of stray away from a volume-based approach and look to, do sort of a fee that scales up with their sort of projected growth plans. And look, the implementation point is a good one. So look, that was great for our business originally because we bootstrapped the business. But fortunately, we were able to get some traction with NAB, and some of those fees give you the working capital you need to really get to market. And I think people are, certainly big organisations are used to sort of paying that fee for that support, up to the go live period as well. But very much, I think that recurring, monthly sort of subscription model is how we've approached our business.
Wonderful. Well, I think if there are no more questions, or do we have one more? Oh, sorry. Yep.
Go for it.
I'll make it quick. Lizzie Condon from MasterCard. So you've spoke heavily about some of your experiences with working with the traditional banks and some of the larger players. I'd be keen to understand if, the differences in working with some of the new digital banks. I can assume, we'd hope that the implementation would be maybe easier, but any other differences that you can speak to for these new entrants?
Oh, look, it's an interesting one. Look, I think the theory, if you speak to Stuart, the theory of an API is you shouldn't need a person, right? If you integrate with Google's APIs, you jump on the website, you get the spec and a sandbox, and off you go. But understandably, there is a process of supporting banks. But whether it's neobank or startup bank versus established banks, we've worked with some established banks albeit they've joined later than NAB and ANZ, so a lot of the teething issues have been solved. So, there was a large second-tier bank we had one phone call with, and they were live, a couple of weeks later. There's been some neobanks that we spent 3 years whiteboarding stuff with, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say it's perhaps a big bank versus startup bank. It's more, I guess, the customer you're working with and at what point they're starting to work with us. I think most customers that join us now, it's a pretty smooth process for one of the tried and tested use cases. Right?
Great. Well, thank you so much to the panel. I think we've got some gifts for you over on the left, and then let's all head to lunch. Right. And we'll see you back here at 1.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.